there is a better option. You just have to oust President Zelensky and rise someone there who has control of at least most of the military. And then you will have at least a truce. I think then at that point Russia will agree to the truce, but the terms will be heavy and you have to meet them. And there is no NATO, there is no European troops on the ground, there is no US support, there is nothing. There can be only minuscule Ukrainian military. That's the Finnish example. And you have to admit that we lost. You don't have to say it in writing, but you have to admit it.
Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Dr. Tuomas Malinen, an Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Helsinki and an outspoken critic of his country's NATO integration. We recently exchanged emails about how today's situation in Ukraine resembles more and more the way the Finnish-Soviet situation looked like in 1944. So that's what we want to discuss today. Tuomas, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And nice to have you back. And thank you also for that exchange, because I didn't realize just how deep the resemblance is of what happened in Finland, you know, up until 44 and in Ukraine until now, and how these two countries at two different points in time were in very similar situation. Could you maybe lay that out, first of all?
Yeah, before I start, I just want to mention that it has been very strange to follow the commentary of our president, Alexander Stubb, and our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Elina Valtonen, how the Finnish example does not apply or should not be applied to the Ukrainian case.
She said really that explicitly.
Yeah, they have said that. President Stubb, was it interview of Politico or Bloomberg, something? He said it explicitly that the Finnish example should not be used. And the interesting thing is that this was was it 3 days after or a week after I had tweeted that Ukraine should follow the Finnish example. So, but anyway, but like I just mentioned there is a more of a resemblance than I originally understood, because when Finland joined Nazi Germany in Operation Barbarossa in the summer of 1941, yes.
and sorry, that was after the short Winter War, right?
Winter War was from November 1939 till beginning of March 1940.
Yeah, in which Finland was attacked by Russia, which ended in
attacked, unprovoked attack. So, and that was kind of our moment of heroism that we really shouldn't be able to hold the Soviet forces, but we did, with a very minuscule force, and there was absolutely no thinking amongst our political elite that the Soviet Union would attack. Fortunately, the leader of our defense forces, Marshal Mannerheim, saw this, and he actually called for a what's the word in English? Anyway, he called all the troops, basically all the Finnish troops, to a training session, which lasted until the Soviet Union attacked. I don't actually remember, was it the 1st of November, or I've forgotten the exact date. But it was there, and there was actually a false flag operation in the village of Mainila in northern Finland, where actually the Soviet Union used grenade launchers to attack its own positions, and claimed that Finns had done it, and then we got onwards from there. And we lost quite a bit of land, 11% in the Winter War. And then our leadership decided that we will try to take it back. And we were an unofficial partner of the Operation Barbarossa, which commenced on the 22nd June, I think, 1941.
June.
And and our forces started their offensive 1 day later than Nazi German forces through Poland and Ukraine, and our troops commenced the offensive 1 day later.
So you had Nazi Germany basically attacking the Soviet Union in June, then Barbarossa through Poland and on the mainland, and then you had Finland opening a second front in the north, joining the Nazi Germany in
Yeah.
attacking the Soviet Union.
And actually, there were Wehrmacht troops, which was the army of Nazi Germany, in the northern Finland, attacking from there.
Okay.
So our this is how you see the politicization of history. Our history considers it as an independent or individual war, but it was most definitely a part of Operation Barbarossa. But after Nazi Germany lost, most fortunately, we had to kind of try to navigate our way back into the Western powers who basically built the post-Second World War organizations and infrastructure. So we made these small adjustments, and the kindness of the Western forces allowed us to explain that we were not actually part of Operation Barbarossa. We just took advantage of it. And they were kind to take.
Isn't it also sometimes referred to as the continuation war, the Winter War?
Yeah, it's a continuation war. Yes.
So
yes.
they tried. I mean, our history explicitly tries to dissociate Finland from Nazi Germany in order to say, like, it's actually just the second part of the Winter War, right? So it's not Finland is not Nazi. It's not Nazi. It was just unfortunate.
We didn't go in the Nazi ideology, but Germany was our brother in arms. I remember my grandfather, he had the respect for Russians, but all his life, as long as I remember, he considered Germans as their brothers because they fought alongside themselves. And Finns really, what happened in Central Europe didn't really concern us. We didn't take any major part in the Holocaust, although there was a group of 1,600 men or something, which went to the SS troops. It was called the Nordic. Anyway, so they went there and they did some nasty stuff, but they were a very minor part of the Finnish population who actually took part on this on these atrocities of Nazis. So in general, the war-going people, men in Finland, consider Germany as a brother, Germans as brothers in arms, and that's how they saw it. And our history studies and writing, they made some big leaps, efforts to disentangle us from the Nazi Germany. And to be honest, I was I took up on that too, because I had an argument with the clerk of Imperial War Museum in London in 2000, because they had the map in their wall where they said countries dominated by Nazis, and Finland was there. And I started a exchange with it's the I don't remember what's the term, but it's the who kind of in museums who kind of checks that the history they are present there is correct. There's a certain term for those people. I don't remember what it is now. But anyway, we started actually a email exchange with him on this topic, and I kind of at the end I had a big response coming back, but I kind of left the thing then. But the idea was that I was not pleased that the Imperial War Museum had put Finland as a country dominated by Nazis. We were not dominated; we were just partners, and that's the fact. But our kind of history writing has really tried to push us away so that we wouldn't have been partners, but we were. But okay, so that's the kind of prerequisite for introduction to the topic. But in 1944, in summer, Finland had taken back the whole Karelian Peninsula, and our troops were something 120 kilometers, I think, from Leningrad, so very close. The troops never took actual part in the siege, but they effectively were part of it because they were so close. So they were stopping help coming from the sea, basically. And then I just relearned this. Marshal Mannerheim had also invaded parts of Soviet Union in the eastern part of Finland. So our troops had went past the border. And I just read, I had completely forgotten about this. Mannerheim was fixated on that part we had taken from Western Russia as a bargaining chip for negotiations. The same thing that Zelensky seemed to have been with Kursk. And when there was this major offensive by the Soviet Union in the Karelian Peninsula, the best troops, the core of our troops, were actually in the eastern Finland, or the part invaded. And this is the exact same thing what happened in Ukraine. And I honestly, I just relearned it in just an hour ago.
And
yeah.
And so the thing is that in 44, then the Soviet Union really started pushing back Finland heavily, right? And on the peninsula, and it basically forced Finland into accepting that the war was lost. I mean, the way, or at least the war goals were unobtainable. So what happened then next for Finland?
Yeah, it was the beginning of June. The Soviet Union started a major offensive in the Karelian Peninsula. They had a major material and personal advantage, and they basically pushed through. They took whole the peninsula back, almost all of it. And then there was this Tali-Ihantala miracle, which is called in Finland, that there was a defense battle in Tali-Ihantala where they stopped the major offensive of the Soviet Union. And when Russian or Soviet troops were rolling through the peninsula, there was a communique from Moscow, which was later deemed as a mistake, demanding for unconditional surrender of Finnish troops. But after we stopped the major attack with heavy casualties, and actually both my grandfather and the brother of my grandmother both were at those definite battles. My grandfather was a truck driver, lorry driver, and he drew ammunition to the artillery under total Russian air power or air dominance. And I remember as a child hearing one of the discussion, because the brother of my grandmother, he was in the front line in the battles where they stopped the progress of Russian troops. And I remember this discussion. We were talking next to a fire one day when I don't remember, was the 8 or 9 or something, and they were discussing that who was in the most danger. And my grandfather said to the brother of my grandmother that, no, you were in the front line. That was heavy. But the brother replied that, no, you were driving a lorry full of explosives under complete Russian air dominance. That was crazy and dangerous. And it kind of ended there, the discussion. But anyway, I remember this. So, okay, when the progress was stopped, there was a hurry of the Soviet leadership, Joseph Stalin, namely that they should get to the Eastern Front where they had started the major offensive. There was a race to Berlin, and it led to the changing of the tone from Moscow that, okay, truce is possible and even peace. And then came the crucial moves. Finland, then president of Finland was Risto Ryti. He immediately resigned because Moscow demanded that you cannot sign peace with the same president that led you into a war. And he resigned, and there was a special law by the Parliament of Finland, and they raised the leader of our defense forces, Marshal Mannerheim, as the leader, as the president of Finland. And this was done so that Finnish troops would accept the peace deal, and to ensure the Finnish populace, because he was a highly esteemed person, Marshal Mannerheim. So it was made. So the second thing, the first thing was that they wanted the forces to stop fighting, and the second thing was that they wanted Finnish people to understand that this was an actual peace, actual truce, not a trick by Moscow. And so these were all done in August and beginning of August, and at the end of August 44, we got the demands from Moscow, and they were extremely heavy, but we had no other option but to sign them. And the Moscow armistice was signed on 19th of September 1944, and month from that, the Soviet High Representative who actually oversaw the denazification of Finland came to Finland. So we were, for several years, we were under de facto Soviet Union control. And then the idea of this I forgot his name, but anyway, the general that came here was to oversee that all the Nazis are removed from the Finnish soil, all the nationalistic movements are dismantled, and all persons tied to them are indicted. And all war criminals are also indicted. And this was an allied surveillance force in Finland, but it was led by the Soviet Union. So our leadership completely capitulated, changed the leadership of our country because Moscow demanded so, and allowed Soviet forces to come Finland to oversee that everything is happening as ordered. And so this is how Finland found its peace. And there is a twist at the end, because when the truce came and the terms for peace, a nationalistic people in Finland hid a lot of military weapons, so that if Soviet Union would invade Finland, they could start a guerrilla warfare. And this is also something that Stalin understood and knew, and that's probably one thing that we had peace throughout the rest of the World War II. But anyway, the main points are that we did what Moscow demanded, and
without security guarantees, right?
No, we had nothing. We had to remove the Wehrmacht, the German soldiers from our soil, and it actually led to a war of Lapland, which Germany basically burned the northern part of Finland. So it was a heavy toll, but we needed to do all those things, and we needed also to pay a crazy amount of war reparation. It was something like 300-something million at that currency, which would respond to about 7 billion euros nowadays, a massive amount of money.
Yeah,
and
but that's it. I mean, you lose a war. I mean, there is nothing else you can do except for trying to somehow save the national polity, right? And the
country.
The amazing thing, the country, and like saving your nationals. The thing is then that Finland, in, what was it, 51 or 53, when then Finland signed actually a security treaty with the Soviet Union, right?
Yeah, there was the agreement on cooperation, friendship, and whatever. It was called WWII in Finnish, and it was
the key aspect.
The Warsaw Pact was in 50. I think it was 48 or something, before NATO or something.
48. You're right. You're right.
Yeah,
because NATO 48 this one, and then 49 NATO, and then 53, 54 Warsaw Pact. But the point in 48 with that assistance agreement, Finland agreed that if ever somebody tried to attack the Soviet Union through Finnish territory, then Finland would automatically cooperate with the Soviet Union in repelling
No,
the
no.
attack.
The wording was that we will attack them, we will repel them, and if we need help, we negotiate
Yeah,
with the Soviet Union.
exactly.
So
But you
yeah, so
basically you
and
promise to repel, right?
yeah,
Any attack.
yeah,
And that
that was
held that
and
held Finnish independence and neutrality for the whole Cold War.
yeah, that was the strike of genius from then President Juho Kusti Paasikivi, because he knew that okay, NATO is coming. He understood that blocks are coming, and we wanted to stay out of the
Yeah.
Warsaw Pact, which of course didn't have a name back then. And this was done through this deal. It was a pure strike of genius. And one thing we have to remember, that I have to say that the Paris peace treaties in 1947, they were harsh on Finland. We didn't really have a decent military for many, many years after that. So people arguing that Ukraine should have a military build-up right after that never happens in peace. When you lose, you are stripped to your very bones, and then you try to find a peaceful coexistence with the one who won you, to whom you lost.
I wonder why it is so absolutely unthinkable right now for Western countries to imagine this situation where, Ukraine today is much closer to Finland, where it was in 44, or to Japan in 45. Not so much, not Germany. I don't think the German scenario is close. But definitely
Oh,
Finland or Japan, because actually
yeah.
both Finland and Japan, they surrendered. They gave up. The Russians
I
didn't
think
have
I
to go
think
to the bunker.
let me interrupt. I think we capitulated is the term. Japan unconditionally surrendered. There's a hint of a difference.
Okay.
Yeah, because the Moscow retreat the demand for an unconditional surrender, and we just capitulated and everything. So it's semantics, I know. Basically, the same thing happened, but the terms are just a little bit different.
No, but you're right. This is important because for Japan, for the longest time, until they actually decided to surrender, the major problem was that they didn't know whether the Americans would allow them to keep the emperor. That was the main sticking point. And actually, the Japan hands in the US said, Joseph Grew, the former US ambassador to Japan, he told Truman, I mean, first uh, uh, um, Roosevelt and then Truman, if you promise the Japanese to keep the emperor, they will give up. And they said,
Yeah,
like, no, we're not
yeah,
promising them that. We will decide. They have to be. I mean, we might hang the guy, and if we want to hang the guy, we hang the guy. And they actually ramped that through. So Finland wasn't. The Soviets actually said, fine. I mean, there's certain conditions we accept.
yeah. And they were all, and actually now that you brought that up, it's an Soviet control was actually rather lenient. They just went through. They just wanted to see certain things happening, but I don't remember there would have been any like clear oppression of the Finnish populace or our leadership. They let us operate. They just said that you need to follow these rules, and for some reason, it's Stalin actually liked Finland. Many Russian leadership have liked us and liked our country and our populace. So there is something of a friendly relationship. And yeah, we were treated much better than Japan. Well, of course, Moscow did not have any nukes, but if they would have, I seriously doubt they would have nuked, for example, Helsinki or Turku or something like
I
that,
mean, did
which
they
Americans did.
did they start setting up military bases in Finland?
Yeah, we had one in Porkkalaniemi, which was we had to relinquish it to the Soviet forces for I don't remember extended period of time. It was still the 1950s, I think. So there were Soviet troops close. So they just wanted to make sure that Finland doesn't try anything again.
Right.
That
Um,
that was the point.
but so basically, that at the moment when Finland not surrendered, but
Capitulated.
capitulated,
Mm.
that was the moment when it stopped. And actually, Finland didn't cease to exist. I mean, today, the whole of Western Europe is still pretending that if Ukraine capitulated, then Ukraine would be gone, right? It would be dissolved somehow magically. I mean, the Russians would just swallow it up, and then everything would vanish. This is a pure stupid fantasy, isn't it? It never happens like that. I mean,
No.
not to
No,
big countries. I mean, Estonia and so on. I mean, they went through a different trajectory with the Soviet Union, but even they were integrated, but not dissolved.
yeah, when the Soviet Union started its attack, they were actually under orders to proceed to basically invade Finland. So that's how it went. But it changed in many terms. But the main point is that Soviet Union was an actual superpower. It could have taken Finland and hold it. And it's completely different with Russia now, which is when Soviet Union was the second biggest economy and military power of the world. Now Russia is GDP is the size of Texas. So that should make people understand that economically Russia cannot invade Europe. It makes absolutely no sense. Their economic model fails. Everything fails. Federal fiscal balance fails. Everything fails. There's absolutely no idea that modern Russia would be trying to take over most of Europe.
And the whole thing is modern Russia works well as modern Russia. And
Yeah.
the territories that they now occupy and integrated into their state territory, they did so after trying for how many? Like for 8 years, saying like, no, these territories should remain part of Ukraine, right? They only changed the whole approach in 2022 when it became utterly clear that this situation is untenable. So, but for
Yeah.
the rest of Ukraine, the whole point is that the Russians still want a solution, just as they wanted a solution for Finland.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
um,
And the biggest difference is that when our leaders saw that we couldn't take another major offensive, they knew that okay, then our defenses would crumble under Soviet troops would march over Finland, and that would be end of our country. They wanted to save that. And the biggest difference is now that Zelensky, he's no Risto Ryti or Mannerheim. He doesn't care about the safety, about the survival of Ukraine, I think, not anymore. He has become consumed by the war like Adolf Hitler was. Hitler could have surrendered many times, but he did not. He fought to the bitter end, or then he escaped to Argentina, who knows. But anyway, so Germany was destroyed. And this is the biggest difference and if I may add, is that I don't understand why European leaders, while knowing all our history, are pushing Ukraine to the brink, unless there's an aim to open a wider front against Russia in Europe. If that's the aim, then this makes perfect sense. In all other scenarios, considering our history, they should not be acting like that. They should be saying that, okay, it's okay, stop, let's stop here. They should have said it 2 years ago, but let's stop here. Because we know how destructive wars are. We in Europe know that very well.
yeah. But we must not underestimate the incredible psychological dynamics of war, because the war in Japan was lost in 1941 when they attacked on Pearl Harbor. And
Yeah.
even, I mean, I read documents from Sweden that said Sweden said like this, there's no way they can win this. This is
Mm.
suicide. And it was suicide.
Mm.
I mean, yes, they can
Mm.
go bigger before they will completely collapse. And that's exactly what happened. The best case scenario for Japan when they attacked Pearl Harbor was to split the Pacific in half. The best case
Yeah.
scenario of the most optimistic generals and admirals was to basically stop in front of like Hawaii or maybe Hawaii, and then you split somewhere there. That was the best thing. And if that's your best case scenario, you are a lunatic. And then they weren't able to stop and to give up until everything around them burned, because
Mm.
the state was so distributed and nobody had all the power in their hands to actually give up. Um, so the question is, how did Finland manage uh, to 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 stop it? I mean, what was the political process like that allowed the president back then to hand over power, and then that power to actually say like, fine, we will now suffer the unsufferable, as the Japanese said, and surrender or
Capitulate.
sorry, capitulate. I need to get
Yeah,
that word into my mind. How did Finland politically internally manage to capitulate?
that's a good point, the good question, and at this point I don't have an answer to that. But we had a leadership when we looked through the war years. It was very skillful. Although there were of course some mistakes in the military leadership and some mistakes made by the political leaders, but it was the understanding, I think, the understanding of everybody what will happen if we continue to war after that point when we got seriously beaten up, and almost, our fronts almost collapsed. So I think it was the idea that this needs to stop. We need to save our country. The political gimmicks, how did it go? I don't actually know, but it was just the parliament passed a special law that said, put Marshal Mannerheim on the leadership. And there was this one thing, is that Risto Ryti had personally agreed in a letter to Adolf Hitler that he will not seek for peace with the Soviet Union. This was done just when the major offensive started in 44, if I remembered correctly. So he had to resign because he had committed himself to this. So he resigned. And the way the Marshal Mannerheim, like I said, was raised as a president so that the troops would lay down their arms.
Right.
And the people, that the peace was a real deal.
This is
So
very,
that's
very sorry, this is very, very important, because there's always the danger that then certain regiments and so on start breaking off and start fighting and continue fighting, right? In Japan, the most important thing was that the emperor actually recorded his voice and it was transmitted, and the emperor ordered everybody to stand down. And that was the
so
moment when all the soldiers put down their weapons, because, well, that's it. We have the highest order. And this is very important. So in terms of Ukraine, you would actually need to, I mean, as an analogy, you would need Zelensky to step down and basically put Syrski, or maybe former general, what was his name? He's now in London. The former general.
Chalan something. I don't.
The
I
former
just read
general,
about.
I mean, in power,
Yeah,
or Mary Syrski as the commander of the
yeah.
forces, who then demands and commands the Ukrainians to stand down.
But the question is, like your former guest said, I forgot his name, but I actually wrote, like I sent you, I wrote a piece about his analysis. He was the professor of the Rhode Island professor.
Nikolai Petro.
Petro, yeah, that the fascist forces are so strong in Ukraine that I don't really know how you control those.
Yeah.
So they may continue fighting by themselves.
Yes.
So when I read that, I kind of made the recommendation that the only way to lasting peace in Ukraine is that the AFU surrenders. And for that to happen, it is required that the US President Trump stops all military aid, and Elon Musk cuts the Starlink. If those things happen, we will have truce in Ukraine in a matter of weeks. But as long as those continue, the aid and the Starlink thing, I think they can continue grinding more for a long time, unless Russia really then goes into this full war and takes Kiev.
Yeah. No, you're right. And this is actually the strongest bargaining chips the Americans have. Like, it's not, they don't have that much, because by now it is clear that the Russians can militarily overpower the Ukrainians and NATO forces. they can do it, right? They're able to do it, but it will take them time. So the biggest
Mm.
bargaining chip that the Americans have is to say like, well, if we get an agreement, then we jointly, United States and Russia, can descend upon Ukraine and force them to accept what we arrange between us.
Mm.
But as long as there's no understanding and the US aid and intelligence keeps flowing and Starlink keeps working, the Ukrainians have the ability to resist, even though it's a losing resistance. But
Yeah,
and it's of course a meat grinder. It's a meat grinder.
it
But
is.
the we know now that the Americans, also through the New York Times article, the Americans don't care. I mean, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 dead Ukrainians. What does it matter as long as we have this political bargaining chip? It's horrible, but that's what it is.
It is disgusting, but that's how these things work. And I hope that President Trump would have brought a change, and it originally looked like that, but it's now it's looking the other way. He could really put an end to this, but he has to understand that it requires admitting U.S. NATO defeat,
Yeah.
and if he defends that, then he will probably have its own Vietnam or something like that in Ukraine. So, well, not in the sense that the Americans are not dying there, but at least not yet. But you have to put this down before Europe, or not Europe, but the European Commission and the European leaders get their insane plans off the ground to help Ukraine. So we don't have a lot of time, a year at max. And there's the other option that President Putin and Kremlin just said that enough. And they go for an actual war operation, take Kiev, push them to the neighbor, and then Ukraine will be split. It will be extremely burdensome to the Russians, but it would also bring peace. But this meat grinder is horrible for everyone, for humanity, for Europe, and it carries the risk that when Europeans get into or not Europeans, but our leaders, European leaders, get into the war footing, then the war will eventually spread. And I'm not completely sure that President Trump understands the risks and the stakes now in Europe. I don't think he has the understanding. Maybe in his administration there is an European experts who explain that how European-wide wars spread, how they come to be. So I think there is these solutions in wars or peace in wars only come through harsh measures, unfortunately, when they are prolonged wars, especially like the Ukraine conflict now is. So drastic things, unfortunately, need to happen. But I don't. The conscience of European leaders cannot be good. I could not live with myself if I would push for more mostly Ukrainian deaths in Ukraine like they do. I don't know how they sleep at night, our President Stubb and my former friend and a Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen. I don't know how she sleeps. It's just appalling.
I think they sleep pretty well because, something you don't have doesn't bother you. There's an absolute complete lack on the moral front, especially the fact that they managed to still moralize the dying in a moment. I mean, at
Yeah,
some
but
point, the crazy thing about this whole war drive is that, and I think Finland also proved it back then, you go to war for the nation. And at some point, the pressure becomes so intense that the only thing that saves the nation is to give up.
yeah,
And this is the madness, but this is part of how this whole thing works. So at the moment, for Ukraine to survive as a nation would mean to either surrender or capitulate, and just
yeah.
say like, okay, so And it would be the thing is it wouldn't even be the first time for this to
No, it
happen
would
in
not.
Europe or in Asia. I mean, this the capitulations, surrenders have happened time and again, and nations time and
Mm.
again have survived it. I mean, I'm living in one, you're living in one. It's like, who the hell came up with the idea that if you surrender or give up, that then you disappear from the map? Um,
No, yeah,
these people didn't
it's a
study
made up
history.
concept. Yeah, they don't. But I have to add this one thing because I knew Elena personally for 5 years. We were friends. She is a moral person.
Okay.
She has just completely she has just corrupted herself, let herself become corrupted to this whatever force is pushing this progress in behind, or pushing this in behind the scenes. And Alexander Stubb, well, I don't know him personally, but I know a lot of people who do, and he's a narcissist. And I think actual he's been groomed by the elite, so he does what the elite orders them to do. And I keep returning to this in every single interview. We should understand that there's a systematic force now pushing through this. Otherwise, all major European leaders pushing for more war in Ukraine makes no sense. So there's the NATO deep state, and then there's the military industrial complex, and even maybe something else, but those are enough, and they won their war.
I mean, there's definitely something that changes people once they are in power, and you can also observe that with Tulsi Gabbard, who for the longest time made a career out of saying the war in Yemen needs to stop, and now
Mm.
she recently starts defending bombing of Yemen. I mean, something happens. It is somehow possible to co-opt or to change the tune of these individuals once they are in the position where they need to, where that they get to. I don't know what it is, but it's a phenomenon that we observe time and again. But just to come back to Finland and Ukraine, um, so if you were advising Russia,
Mm.
what would you tell them how to, according to the Finnish example, how to make it most likely that the Ukrainians go for the Finnish example?
Major offensive, threat Kiev. Really, that's the give Donald Trump a few weeks and then go for it. Just you have to you lose more lives, but if the war doesn't stop soon, it will not stop at all, or it stop at some point, but it will enlarge and widen. So that would my advice to Kremlin. You need to, if President Trump does not do what he could do to end this, you need to end this. Russians need to end it, and then they need to go to total war.
That's a very sad advice. I was more hoping for something like a carrot, not a
No, no,
stick.
just let me
A carrot. Can we think of a carrot, like something that Russia could like say,
No,
like,
this is the Finnish experience. We understood when we were threatened by collapse. And I don't know, is Zelensky capable of this, but maybe when a whole Ukraine is about to collapse, maybe then President Trump, European leaders understand that, okay, something needs to be done. Because if President Putin allows European troops to enter Ukraine, this will become a European war eventually.
yes, but
So
the danger is that, while we think of this right now in Second World War analogy, the Americans might be thinking of it in Afghanistan analogy.
mhm,
Okay, have the Russians come, have them take Kiev, have them go further east, and then
mm,
guerrilla warfare. 10 years, bleed them dry. I mean, kill even more Ukrainians, but keep bleeding them because, like Hillary Clinton said so. It's like, let's make it the Afghanistan of Europe and bleed the Russians dry with whatever we have. And guerrilla warfare would be the next stage. So Russia needs to
yeah,
avoid guerrilla warfare, right? What the Russia needs to achieve is the capitulation of the Ukrainian state, which is
mm,
difficult to achieve. So how to get to
mm.
capitulation and not to guerrilla warfare?
Well, like I said, they need to go all, but the point there is a better option. You just have to oust President Zelensky and rise someone there who has control of at least most of the military. And then you will have at least a truce. I think then at that point Russia will agree to the truce, but the terms will be heavy and you have to meet them. And there is no NATO, there is no European troops on the ground, there is no US support, there is nothing. There can be only minuscule Ukrainian military. That's the Finnish example. And you have to admit that we lost. You don't have to say it in writing, but you have to admit it. And the ball is in the court of President Trump. He can make this all happen, but for some reason he does not. You know, not Soviet Union, the UN, similar things, and military front, but US can say, President Trump can say to President Zelensky that now it's your time to go. And he can say it in such a way that President Zelensky understands that he needs to go. And then he goes. I hear he has a villa in Italy and an apartment in Miami. Go there. There must be a law in Ukraine which says that what happens if president resigns. You know, there has to be a law that says that, okay, in that case, Parliament can assign an interim president.
Yeah, of
you
course,
go
of
from
course.
here. You need to go to three. Zelensky cannot negotiate on peace. He has too much to lose. The corruption would come forward. You know, the Finnish example, you have to change the leadership. And President Trump has this option. But if he refuses to do those things and Europeans get into the war gear properly, sending troops, all that, we risk an all-European conflict. And this is something only at that point, if President Trump fails, only President Putin can deliver by enacting a full war. Now it has been a special military operation, engaged in full warfare against Ukraine with the aim of taking Kiev. The options are extremely harsh because the European leadership is not playing ball with the rest of the world and European populace who wants peace. Everything that happens from this henceforth, every single death, is on the hands of the European leadership. Von der Leyen, Stubb, Macron, Starmer. These are the true war criminals from henceforth, because they would need to be pushing for war and not for deeper conflict.
For peace.
And that's
they
it.
would need to push for peace and not for deeper conflict.
Peace. Not another conflict, peace, yeah. So they would need to push for peace, not for conflict, yeah.
Especially, I mean, it's an insane situation also in which the Europeans, the Brits and the French keep saying like, yeah, we want to send boots on the ground, but only if the Americans give a backstop. It's madness because on the one hand, the Europeans understand and admit that they're too weak to do this and that they will be annihilated if they try to do so in Ukraine. On the other hand, they still pretend that they want to do that. And the all in order to keep the Ukrainians somehow fighting, and they keep dangling actually NATO membership in front of the Ukrainians like a little carrot, right? And but they never give it, right? They could have given it 3 years ago and gone to war with Russia. They didn't. So how long do you think it will take for the Ukrainians to understand that they are being absolutely, utterly, completely deceived by the people who pretend to be their saviors?
I have only few contacts to Ukraine, but those that I have understood that the control in the country is not very far from what the SA troops in Nazi Germany unleashed among the German populace. So you cannot speak against these things. You will get killed or mutilated or something like that. So it looks horrible, but you cannot object the leadership that is annihilating your country and your populace. Ukraine has become a grave victim in this war, and I feel heartfelt, really heartfelt sorrow for the Ukrainian populace that this has come. upon them. It's heartbreaking and horrible.
Same.
But
Yeah.
like I said, now every horror that comes from henceforth is on the hands of the European leadership.
I will neither confirm that nor deny it. I'll just let it stand there. I want this to end. I mean, and it is also true that if if the weapons stop shooting, then the dying ends. But there is very clear political reasons for why this doesn't happen. So Tuomas, thank you very much. This was an insightful talk, and it was a good parallel. And I do think the Finnish example should stand paramount to all the possible solutions. People can go to your Substack to read more from you, right?
Yeah, and then I'm a trained economist, but my lifelong hobby, because of my mom, who was a now retired a lecturer of history and society. So geopolitics has been in my life since my teenage years. So.
And geopolitics is very closely connected to economics, and it impacts us all. Just look at the current tariffs, but we didn't even get to talk about that. Maybe next time.
No,
Tuomas Malinen.
next time, yeah.
Tuomas Malinen, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks.